Right now, as you're processing these words, something extraordinary is happening within the quantum fabric of your reality. Your consciousness is vibrating at a frequency that most people will never access in their entire lifetime. The fact that you're here, absorbing this transmission, isn't random chance or algorithmic coincidence. This is quantum recognition. Your awareness has reached a critical threshold, and the universe is about to show you something that will fundamentally alter how you understand existence itself. What I'm about to reveal will challenge everything you thought you knew about transformation, about identity, about the very nature of who you are. Because here's the truth that quantum physicists have discovered but rarely discuss openly. The version of you that existed yesterday, the identity you've carried for years, perhaps decades, isn't just changing during periods of growth. It's literally collapsing at the quantum level, dissolving into pure potential so that an entirely new version of you can emerge from the field of infinite possibilities. This isn't metaphysical speculation. This is measurable, observable quantum mechanics operating through your consciousness. And if you can feel something shifting inside you as these concepts land, if there's a recognition stirring in your awareness right now, then you're already experiencing what scientists call quantum coherence. Your old identity structure is beginning to destabilize, making space for something unprecedented to emerge. Most people experience this collapse unconsciously, interpreting it as confusion, crisis, or chaos. They fight against it, trying to preserve the familiar version of themselves even when that version has outgrown its usefulness. But when you understand the quantum mechanics behind this process, when you recognize the signs and align with the natural intelligence of transformation, something miraculous happens. Instead of resisting the collapse, you learn to surf it, to dance with it, to use it as the launching pad for your most authentic evolution. The quantum realm operates on principles that seem impossible to our everyday minds. Particles exist in multiple states simultaneously until the moment of observation collapses them into a single reality. What we're discovering is that human identity follows the same quantum laws. Right now, multiple versions of who you could become exist in superposition around you. The stressed version, the abundant version, the confident version, the version living your dream life. They're all equally real in the quantum field, waiting for your consciousness to choose which one to collapse into your lived experience. But here's where it gets fascinating. During periods of intense growth, during what we call quantum shifts, your current identity literally cannot hold the frequency of who you're becoming. The electromagnetic field generated by your thoughts, emotions, and beliefs becomes incompatible with the new timeline you're accessing. This creates what quantum physicists call a phase transition, where your entire identity structure must reorganize at a higher level of complexity. Think about water becoming steam. For a moment, it's neither liquid nor gas. It exists in a transitional state that defies easy categorization. That's exactly what's happening to you during a quantum shift. Your old identity is dissolving while your new identity is still forming. You're in the quantum void, the space between who you were and who you're becoming. And this void isn't empty, it's pregnant with infinite potential, buzzing with creative energy, alive with possibilities that didn't exist before you entered this transformational phase. The signs of quantum collapse are unmistakable once you know what to look for. You might notice that strategies that used to work for you suddenly feel ineffective. Relationships that once felt comfortable now feel constraining. Goals that once motivated you now feel hollow or misaligned. Your old responses to familiar situations feel forced, like you're wearing a costume that no longer fits. This isn't failure or regression. This is evidence that your consciousness has expanded beyond the boundaries of your previous identity. During quantum collapse, you might experience what feels like losing yourself. The voice in your head that used to provide certainty becomes quiet or confused. The emotional patterns that defined your personality start shifting unpredictably. Your entire sense of who you are becomes fluid, unstable, uncertain. This phase can feel terrifying because your ego interprets the dissolution of familiar patterns as death. But what's actually dying is only the limited version of yourself that could never have accessed what's coming next. Neuroscientists studying consciousness transformation have identified specific brainwave patterns that occur during these identity shifts. Your neural networks literally rewire themselves, creating new connections while pruning away outdated pathways. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for self-concept and future planning, shows increased activity as it integrates new information about who you're becoming. Meanwhile, the default mode network, which maintains your sense of continuous identity, temporarily destabilizes, allowing for unprecedented neuroplasticity. But the quantum collapse isn't just happening in your brain. Your entire biofield, the electromagnetic signature that extends several feet beyond your physical body, begins resonating at new frequencies. This energetic reorganization affects every cell in your body, every relationship in your life, every opportunity in your environment. You become a different person, not just psychologically, but biologically, energetically, quantumly. The old you had specific thoughts, emotions, and behaviors that created a consistent reality. That version of you could only perceive and attract experiences that matched its vibrational frequency. But as that identity collapses, you gain access to entirely new spectrums of possibility. Thoughts that were impossible for the old you become natural for the emerging you. Emotions that were foreign start flowing through your system with ease. Actions that would have terrified your previous identity feel aligned and inevitable. This is why transformation often feels like becoming a completely different person. Because at the quantum level, you literally are. The consciousness animating your body is accessing new dimensional frequencies, new information fields, new creative potentials that existed beyond the perceptual range of who you used to be. You're not just changing your habits or updating your beliefs. You're undergoing a fundamental shift in the very fabric of your being. Understanding this process changes everything about how you navigate periods of growth and change. Instead of trying to maintain control during the collapse, you learn to surrender to the intelligence that's orchestrating your evolution. Instead of fearing the uncertainty, you recognize it as the creative void from which miracles emerge. Instead of clinging to who you've been, you become curious about who you're becoming. The quantum field responds to this shift in your relationship with transformation. When you stop resisting the collapse and start cooperating with it, the process accelerates and becomes far more graceful. Resources appear to support your transition. People show up who understand your journey. Synchronicities multiply as your expanding consciousness creates new intersections with previously invisible possibilities. But here's what most people don't realize about quantum collapse. It's not a one-time event. It's a spiral process that occurs throughout your life whenever you're ready for your next level of evolution. Each time you outgrow a version of yourself, that identity must collapse to make space for your expansion. The more conscious you become of this pattern, the more skillfully you can navigate each transition, using the dissolution as fuel for your continuous becoming. The version of you that started reading this message has already begun to shift. These concepts aren't just information entering your mind. They're quantum activators, consciousness upgrade codes that are literally rewiring your neural pathways as you process them. Your brain is forming new connections right now, connections that will support the expanded version of yourself that's emerging through this understanding. This is why certain messages find you at exactly the right moment. Your consciousness, operating beyond linear time, draws to itself the precise information needed for your next quantum leap. The fact that these words are resonating in your awareness means you're ready for what they're preparing you to become. Your old identity is loosening its grip, making space for something unprecedented to emerge from the field of pure potential. Every breakthrough begins with a breakdown. Every rebirth requires a death. Every quantum leap demands the collapse of who you were so that who you're meant to be can finally come alive. This isn't loss. This is liberation. This isn't ending. This is infinite beginning. And you're not just witnessing this process, you are this process, consciousness itself awakening to its own creative nature, identity itself discovering its fluid quantum essence. The old you is collapsing not because something is wrong, but because something is so right that your previous limitations can no longer contain it. What's emerging through this dissolution is the version of yourself you've always sensed was possible, but could never quite access. Until now, the quantum shift has begun and there's no going back to who you used to be, only forward into the magnificent unknown of who you're becoming. The mechanics of quantum collapse operate through what scientists call decoherence, where the wave function of your identity literally breaks down at the subatomic level. Your thoughts, emotions, and beliefs generate electromagnetic frequencies that create interference patterns in the quantum field. When these patterns become incoherent with your expanding consciousness, reality has no choice but to reorganize itself around your new vibrational signature. But here's what makes this process so profound. The collapse doesn't happen gradually. It occurs in discrete quantum jumps, sudden reorganizations where your entire identity structure leaps from one stable configuration to another. One moment you're operating from the old paradigm, and the next moment you've quantum tunneled into an entirely different version of yourself. This explains why transformation often feels sudden and dramatic, even when you've been building toward it for months or years. Your nervous system plays a crucial role in facilitating this quantum collapse. As your consciousness expands, your autonomic nervous system must recalibrate to support new levels of energy, awareness, and possibility. The sympathetic and parasympathetic branches learn to dance together in new ways, creating a coherent state that can hold the frequency of your emerging identity. This is why you might experience physical sensations during periods of intense growth. Unusual energy patterns, changes in sleep or appetite, heightened sensitivity to your environment. These aren't random side effects. They're evidence that your entire biological system is upgrading itself to match the expanded version of consciousness you're becoming. Your heart rhythm variability increases, creating more coherent electromagnetic fields. Your brain waves shift into new patterns of synchronization. Your endocrine system adjusts its chemical symphony to support different emotional baselines and energy states. During the collapse phase, you might notice that your old coping mechanisms stop working entirely. The strategies you used to manage stress, the ways you processed emotions, the methods you relied on for decision-making, they all become ineffective seemingly overnight. This isn't because you've forgotten how to function, it's because the frequency of your expanding consciousness has moved beyond the range where those old tools can operate. Your previous identity was like a radio tuned to a specific station. It could only receive and transmit within a certain bandwidth. But quantum collapse is like upgrading to a completely different type of receiver, one that can access frequencies that were previously beyond your range. The old tuning mechanisms become obsolete because they were designed for a different spectrum of reality entirely. This is where many people get stuck in the transformation process. They try to apply old solutions to new challenges, attempting to force outdated patterns to work in expanded circumstances. It's like trying to run quantum computing software on a basic calculator. The hardware simply cannot support the new level of complexity you're attempting to access. Understanding this helps you navigate the collapse with more grace and wisdom. Instead of fighting to preserve old patterns that no longer serve, you learn to trust the dissolution process. You recognize that the temporary confusion and uncertainty aren't signs of failure, but evidence that your consciousness is reorganizing itself at a higher level of complexity. The quantum field itself becomes your guide during this transition. As your old identity structure breaks down, you become more permeable to subtle information from dimensions of reality that were previously inaccessible. Intuition becomes stronger and more reliable. Synchronicities multiply as your expanding awareness creates new intersections with the flow of universal intelligence. Dreams become more vivid and meaningful as your subconscious mind processes the identity transformation. But here's where the process becomes truly extraordinary. As the old you collapses, you don't just become a slightly improved version of who you were. You gain access to quantum potentials that exist completely outside the trajectory your previous identity could have followed. Possibilities that were literally impossible for the old you become natural expressions of the new you. This is why people often report feeling like they've stepped into a parallel universe during major life transformations. They haven't just changed their circumstances. They've shifted into an entirely different timeline. One where different laws of possibility apply, where different outcomes are available, where different versions of reality become accessible through their expanded consciousness. The collapse creates what quantum physicists call a bifurcation point, where the trajectory of your life splits into completely different probability streams. The old you was following one particular path through the field of possibilities. But the quantum collapse opens doorways to paths that were previously invisible, inaccessible, unimaginable from your former vantage point. Your relationships undergo quantum collapse alongside your identity. People who were perfectly aligned with the old you may suddenly feel incompatible with the frequency you're embodying. This isn't because anyone has done anything wrong. It's because you're literally vibrating at different rates now. Some relationships will evolve to match your new frequency. Others will naturally complete their cycle in your life, making space for connections that resonate with who you're becoming. The same principle applies to every area of your existence. Career paths that once felt meaningful may lose their appeal entirely. Living situations that were comfortable become constrictive. Hobbies and interests that used to captivate you feel hollow or outdated. Your entire lifestyle must reorganize itself around the expanded version of consciousness you're embodying. This reorganization isn't something you have to force or figure out intellectually. The quantum field handles the details of manifestation once you align with the frequency of your authentic evolution. Opportunities appear that perfectly match your new vibrational signature. Resources flow toward you through channels you couldn't have predicted or planned. People enter your life who recognize and support the version of yourself you're becoming. But the most profound aspect of quantum collapse is how it affects your relationship with time itself. Linear time is a construct of limited consciousness, a way of organizing experience that works for stable identities operating within predictable parameters. But during quantum shifts, you begin to access what physicists call non-local time, where past, present, and future exist simultaneously in a field of pure potential. This is why your future self can influence your present experience, why you can receive guidance from versions of yourself that exist in different timelines, why breakthrough moments feel like remembering something you've always known. The collapse of your old identity dissolves the illusion of separation between different temporal states of your being. You start to experience yourself as a multidimensional consciousness temporarily focused through the lens of a particular identity. The old you wasn't wrong or bad. It was simply one facet of your infinite nature, one way of organizing your awareness for a specific phase of your evolution. As that phase completes, the identity structure dissolves back into the quantum field of pure potential, making space for new expressions of your essential being to emerge. The beauty of understanding this process is that it removes the fear and resistance that typically accompany major life changes. When you recognize that the dissolution of familiar patterns is actually the mechanism through which consciousness expands, you can surrender to the transformation with trust rather than terror. You begin to see collapse not as destruction but as the universe's way of creating space for miracles to unfold through your experience. This understanding transforms your relationship with uncertainty from anxiety into anticipation. When you feel the ground shifting beneath your feet, when familiar patterns start dissolving, when the voice of your old identity becomes quieter and less certain, you recognize these as signals that you're approaching another quantum threshold. Your consciousness is preparing to leap into configurations of possibility that were previously beyond your reach. The quantum collapse follows what scientists call the Fibonacci spiral, a mathematical pattern found throughout nature where each phase builds upon the previous ones while creating entirely new levels of complexity. Your identity evolution mirrors this sacred geometry, with each dissolution creating exponentially more sophisticated expressions of your authentic nature. The person emerging from your current collapse isn't just slightly different from who you were 6 months ago. They're operating from dimensions of awareness that your previous identity couldn't even perceive. During the deepest phases of collapse, you might experience what mystics have called the dark night of the soul, and quantum physicists refer to as the vacuum state. This isn't emptiness in the conventional sense. It's the most creative space in the universe, where virtual particles constantly appear and disappear, where infinite potential exists in its purest form. When your old identity dissolves into this quantum vacuum, you're not losing yourself, you're returning to the source code of consciousness itself. Your DNA actually responds to this identity transformation at the cellular level. Epigenetic switches activate and deactivate based on the frequency of consciousness you're embodying. Genes that were dormant in the old you begin expressing themselves, while patterns that supported your previous limitations go offline. You're literally becoming a different person at the biological level, with new capacities, new sensitivities, new ways of processing energy and information. The electromagnetic signature of your heart changes during quantum collapse, creating coherent field effects that extend far beyond your physical body. HeartMath Institute research shows that these coherent heart rhythms can influence the behavior of people and environments within your field. As your identity transforms, you become a walking quantum transmitter, broadcasting new frequencies of possibility that can catalyze transformation in others simply through proximity. But here's where the process becomes counterintuitive. The faster you try to move through the collapse, the longer it takes to complete. Quantum transformation operates on its own timeline, following intelligence patterns that transcend human impatience. Your role isn't to accelerate the process, but to maintain coherence while it unfolds. Like a butterfly dissolving in its chrysalis, you must trust the metamorphosis even when you can't see what you're becoming. The old you had specific ways of interpreting reality, filtering information through belief systems that created consistent but limited experiences. During collapse, these perceptual filters dissolve, flooding your awareness with data streams that were previously invisible. Colors might seem more vivid. Conversations carry deeper layers of meaning. Synchronicities become so frequent they feel like natural law rather than coincidence. You're not going crazy. You're going quantum. Your relationship with money, success, and security undergoes radical transformation during identity collapse. The old you operated from paradigms of scarcity, competition, and linear achievement. But the emerging you begins to understand abundance as a state of consciousness rather than a collection of external circumstances. You start attracting resources through resonance rather than effort. receiving support from the field itself rather than having to generate everything through personal willpower. Dreams become particularly important during quantum collapse phases. Your subconscious mind processes the identity transformation through symbolic narratives that help integrate the new configurations of self. You might dream of dying and being reborn, of shape-shifting into different forms, of flying or traveling to otherworldly dimensions. These aren't random images, they're accurate representations of what's happening to your consciousness at the quantum level. The collapse affects your relationship with physical space as well. Environments that used to feel comfortable might become energetically incompatible with your expanding frequency. You might feel called to rearrange your living space, to spend time in nature, or to seek out locations that resonate with your emerging identity. Your consciousness is learning to recognize and create coherent environments that support its new configuration. Language itself transforms during quantum collapse. Words you used to use feel inadequate or inauthentic. New vocabulary emerges to describe experiences and insights that weren't accessible to your previous identity. You might find yourself speaking with different rhythms, different emphasis, different energetic qualities. This isn't affectation, it's your expanding consciousness finding new ways to express itself through the vehicle of communication. The social implications of quantum collapse can be profound and sometimes challenging. Friends and family members who are accustomed to the old version of you might resist or misunderstand the changes they're witnessing. They're not seeing your evolution. They're seeing the dissolution of patterns they depended on for their own sense of stability. Your transformation forces them to confront the possibility of their own quantum shifts, which can trigger defensive reactions. This is why many people going through identity collapse feel isolated or misunderstood. The emerging you is operating from frequencies that most people haven't accessed yet. You're essentially speaking a different language, vibrating at a different rate, perceiving reality through expanded dimensional awareness. The loneliness isn't permanent. As you stabilize in your new identity, you naturally attract others who resonate with your evolved frequency. Your creative expression undergoes quantum transformation during collapse phases. Artistic endeavors, writing, music, or any form of creative output begins flowing from deeper sources of inspiration. The old you created from personal experience and learned techniques. The emerging you becomes a channel for transpersonal creativity, accessing universal patterns and archetypal energies that weren't available to your previous identity structure. Physical symptoms often accompany quantum collapse as your nervous system recalibrates to handle higher frequencies of consciousness. You might experience changes in energy levels, sleep patterns, dietary preferences, or sensory sensitivity. These aren't health problems, they're upgrade symptoms, evidence that your biological systems are evolving to support the expanded version of awareness you're becoming. The timing of quantum collapse is never random. These phase transitions occur when your consciousness has accumulated enough experiential data to warrant a complete system upgrade. Every challenge you faced, every moment of growth, every instance of choosing expansion over contraction has been building toward this reorganization point. The collapse happens because you're finally ready to integrate everything you've learned into a new level of being. So, understanding the quantum mechanics of identity transformation allows you to surf the dissolution rather than being overwhelmed by it. You learn to recognize the signs that a collapse is beginning, to prepare your environment and relationships for the transition, to maintain practices that support coherence during periods of uncertainty. You become skillful at navigating the space between identities, using the creative potential of the quantum void to consciously participate in designing who you're becoming. The emergence from quantum collapse doesn't happen suddenly. Like dawn breaking gradually across the horizon, your new identity stabilizes slowly, revealing new capacities and perspectives over time. One day you realize you're thinking differently, feeling differently, responding to life from an entirely new baseline. The old patterns that once defined you have been replaced by more sophisticated and authentic ways of being. But here's the most beautiful aspect of this entire process. Once you understand that identity is quantum, fluid, and endlessly creative, you stop fearing change and start embracing transformation as your natural state. You recognize that consciousness itself is always evolving, always expanding, always discovering new ways to express its infinite nature through the temporary forms of individual identity. The old you served its purpose perfectly. It was the exact configuration of consciousness needed for that phase of your evolution. But now that phase is complete, and the quantum field is calling forth new expressions of your essential being. The collapse isn't an ending. It's consciousness updating its software, upgrading its hardware, expanding its capacity to experience and create reality in ways that were previously impossible. You're not losing yourself during this transformation. You're finding yourself. The authentic you that exists beyond all temporary identities, beyond all conditional patterns, beyond all learned limitations. You're discovering the quantum nature of your own consciousness, the fluid creativity that allows awareness to take any form, explore any possibility, become any version of itself that serves the highest evolution of the whole. This recognition changes everything about how you approach life, relationships, challenges, and opportunities. You stop trying to maintain fixed versions of yourself and start dancing with the endless creativity of consciousness itself. You become comfortable with uncertainty because uncertainty is where all possibilities live. You embrace change because change is how consciousness explores its infinite potential. The quantum shift isn't something that happens to you. It's something you are. You are consciousness itself, temporarily organized into the experience of individual identity, but always free to reorganize, to transform, to become something unprecedented and magnificent. The old you is collapsing because the real you is finally ready to be born. The quantum collapse reveals something even more extraordinary about the nature of reality itself. As your old identity dissolves, you begin to perceive what physicists call the observer effect operating through your own consciousness. Every thought you think, every emotion you feel, every choice you make is literally collapsing probability waves into concrete experience. The old you was unconsciously creating reality through habitual patterns of observation. But the emerging you gains conscious access to this quantum creative process. This shift in awareness fundamentally alters your relationship with manifestation and reality creation. The previous version of yourself tried to attract desired outcomes through effort, visualization, and positive thinking. But these methods often felt forced because they were operating from the frequency of lack, from the assumption that what you wanted existed somewhere outside of you. The quantum-aware you understands that all possibilities exist simultaneously in the field, waiting for your consciousness to select which timeline to experience. During the collapse phase, you might notice reality becoming increasingly responsive to your internal states. Synchronicities multiply exponentially as your expanding awareness creates new intersections with the flow of universal intelligence. The boundary between inner and outer experience becomes permeable, revealing that what you've always called external circumstances are actually reflections of your consciousness, observing itself through the mirror of physical reality. Your relationship with time undergoes a profound transformation during quantum collapse. The old you experienced time as linear, sequential, moving from past through present toward future. But as your identity structure dissolves, you begin accessing what quantum physicists call non-linear temporality. Past and future events start influencing your present moment awareness. You receive guidance from future versions of yourself who have already navigated the challenges you're currently facing. This temporal fluidity explains why breakthrough insights often feel like remembering rather than learning something new. Your expanded consciousness can access information from all points along your evolutionary timeline simultaneously. The wisdom you need for your transformation isn't coming from external sources. It's emerging from deeper dimensions of your own awareness that were previously inaccessible to your contracted identity. The energetic signature of your biofield transforms dramatically during quantum collapse. The electromagnetic frequencies generated by your heart, brain, and nervous system begin resonating in new harmonic patterns. These coherent field effects extend several feet beyond your physical body, creating what scientists call morphic resonance with similar frequencies in your environment. You literally become a walking transmitter of expanded consciousness. This explains why people going through quantum shifts often report that others respond to them differently, even when they haven't consciously changed their behavior. Your energetic presence carries new information that activates dormant potentials in people around you. Conversations become deeper and more meaningful. Strangers open up in unexpected ways. Animals and children who are naturally sensitive to energy fields are drawn to your presence. The collapse affects your relationship with fear in fundamental ways. The old you used fear as a survival mechanism, interpreting uncertainty as danger and change as threat. But quantum collapse reveals fear to be nothing more than resistance to the natural flow of consciousness evolution. When you stop fighting the dissolution and start cooperating with it, fear transforms into excitement about the unknown possibilities that are emerging. Your nervous system learns to distinguish between psychological fear based on imagined threats and authentic intuitive guidance about genuine physical dangers. This discernment allows you to move through life with greater courage and authenticity, no longer paralyzed by false alarms from an outdated security system designed for a version of reality you've outgrown. During the deepest phases of collapse, you might experience what mystics call unity consciousness, where the boundaries between self and other, observer and observed, dissolve entirely. These states can be disorienting for the ego mind, which is designed to maintain separation and individuality. But they're actually glimpses into the fundamental nature of reality, where all apparent separations are revealed to be temporary constructs within a unified field of consciousness. These unity experiences aren't spiritual highs or altered states to be sought after. They're natural byproducts of identity dissolution, temporary windows into the quantum nature of existence. They help you understand that individual identity itself is a creative choice rather than a fixed reality, a way of focusing infinite consciousness through particular patterns of experience. The old you had specific ways of processing emotions, usually trying to maintain positive states while avoiding or suppressing negative ones. But quantum collapse reveals emotions to be frequency information, data streams that help consciousness navigate different dimensional realities. The emerging you learns to feel emotions fully without being controlled by them, using their energetic information to make more aligned choices. Anger becomes a signal that boundaries need to be established, or that authentic expression is being suppressed. Sadness becomes a clearing mechanism, helping consciousness release attachments to outdated patterns. Joy becomes recognition of alignment with your essential nature. Fear becomes invitation to examine limiting beliefs that are ready for dissolution. Every emotion carries wisdom when you stop judging it and start listening to its message. Your relationship with material reality transforms as quantum collapse progresses. The old you saw the physical world as solid, separate, and largely beyond your influence. But the emerging you begins to perceive matter as crystallized consciousness, temporarily organized energy that responds to the frequency of awareness observing it. This understanding makes you more effective at creating desired changes in your external circumstances. You stop trying to manipulate matter through force and start influencing it through resonance. Instead of pushing against unwanted conditions, you learn to withdraw your attention from them while consistently focusing on preferred possibilities. This isn't passive wishful thinking. It's active quantum field engineering, using consciousness as a creative tool to collapse probability waves into desired experiences. The social structures and relationships in your life undergo reorganization as your identity transforms. Some connections deepen and evolve to match your expanding frequency. Others naturally complete their cycle, having served their purpose in your previous configuration of consciousness. New relationships appear that resonate with the version of yourself you're becoming, often manifesting in synchronistic ways that feel divinely orchestrated. Your professional life may undergo radical shifts during quantum collapse. Career paths that once seemed secure or satisfying might lose their meaning entirely. The old you chose work based on external validation, financial security, or societal expectations. The emerging you seeks expression that aligns with your authentic gifts and serves the highest good of all involved. This transition isn't always smooth, but it leads to more fulfilling and sustainable forms of contribution. The way you make decisions transforms fundamentally during identity collapse. The old you relied heavily on mental analysis, pros and cons lists, and logical reasoning. But the quantum-aware you learns to access what scientists call morphic field intelligence, tapping into information patterns that exist beyond individual thinking. Decisions begin flowing from deeper knowing rather than surface-level calculation. This shift requires developing trust in your intuitive faculties, which often communicate through subtle energetic sensations rather than clear mental messages. You learn to feel into different choices, noticing which options create expansion in your energy field and which create contraction. This body-based wisdom becomes more reliable than mental analysis alone. Your creative expression undergoes quantum transformation as old identity patterns dissolve. The previous version of yourself created from learned techniques, copied styles, or personal experiences, but the emerging you becomes a channel for transpersonal creativity, accessing universal patterns and archetypal energies that flow through individual consciousness but originate from deeper sources. Art, writing, music, or any form of creative output begins carrying new frequencies of information. Others respond to your creative work differently because it's encoded with expanded consciousness frequencies that can activate similar potentials in those who encounter it. Your creativity becomes a form of service, transmitting quantum awakening codes through whatever medium you choose to explore. The collapse affects your relationship with authority and external validation. The old you sought approval from parents, teachers, bosses, or society to feel worthy and secure. But quantum transformation reveals that true authority comes from alignment with your essential nature rather than external recognition. You stop trying to prove yourself to others and start expressing yourself authentically. This doesn't mean becoming rebellious or dismissive of all guidance. Instead, you develop discernment about which external voices resonate with your inner knowing, and which are trying to keep you trapped in limiting patterns. You become your own ultimate authority while remaining open to wisdom that supports your highest evolution. Physical symptoms during quantum collapse often include changes in sleep patterns, dietary preferences, and energy cycles. Your body is literally rewiring itself to support expanded states of consciousness. What used to feel energizing might become draining. Foods you once enjoyed might no longer resonate with your system. These aren't random changes, but intelligent adaptations to support your evolving frequency. The old you might have interpreted these shifts as health problems requiring medical intervention. The quantum-aware you recognizes them as upgrade symptoms, temporary adjustments as your biological systems recalibrate to handle higher frequencies of awareness. Supporting your body through this transition with proper nutrition, rest, and gentle movement helps facilitate the transformation process. Your relationship with money and abundance undergoes profound shifts during identity collapse. The old you operated from paradigms of scarcity, believing resources were limited and required struggle to obtain. But quantum collapse reveals abundance to be a natural property of consciousness itself, available through alignment rather than effort. You begin attracting resources through resonance with your authentic gifts rather than through forced strategies. This shift can be initially disorienting as old methods of generating income become ineffective while new channels of abundance are still forming. The transition period requires faith in the intelligence of the transformation process, trusting that consciousness will provide everything needed for your evolution even when you can't see how it will happen. The emerging you understands that money is simply crystallized energy, a medium of exchange that flows naturally when consciousness is aligned with its authentic expression. Instead of chasing money directly, you focus on embodying the frequency of your highest contribution, knowing that appropriate compensation will follow naturally. Your relationship with learning and knowledge transforms as quantum collapse progresses. The old you accumulated information from external sources, building a library of facts and concepts to feel prepared for life's challenges. But the emerging you discovers that true wisdom arises from direct experience of consciousness itself, accessed through presence rather than accumulation. This doesn't mean abandoning study or intellectual development. Instead, you learn to integrate outer knowledge with inner knowing, using information as a catalyst for deeper recognition rather than as a substitute for direct experience. Books, teachers, and courses become doorways to remembering what you already know at deeper levels rather than sources of foreign information to be memorized. The dissolution of your old identity creates space for gifts and capacities that were previously dormant to emerge. Abilities you never knew you possessed begin manifesting naturally. Intuitive insights become more frequent and accurate. Healing abilities might activate. Artistic talents could blossom. These aren't random developments but natural expressions of your expanding consciousness finally having space to manifest through your experience. The old you might have dismissed these emerging gifts as imagination or coincidence. The quantum-aware you recognizes them as evidence of consciousness evolution. New faculties coming online as your identity structure becomes sophisticated enough to support them. Developing these gifts becomes part of your service to the collective awakening happening on the planet. As quantum collapse nears completion, you begin stabilizing in a new baseline of awareness that feels both foreign and familiar simultaneously. Foreign because it's unlike anything your previous identity experienced. Familiar because it resonates with your deepest essence in ways that feel like coming home to yourself. The confusion and uncertainty of the transition phase gives way to clarity and confidence in your expanded nature. This new stability doesn't mean becoming rigid or fixed again. Instead, you develop what physicists call dynamic equilibrium, maintaining coherence while remaining fluid and responsive to the continuous evolution of consciousness. You become comfortable with uncertainty because uncertainty is where all possibilities live. You embrace change because change is how consciousness explores its infinite creative potential. The quantum shift reveals that identity itself is a creative choice rather than a fixed reality. You are not bound by your history, your genetics, your circumstances, or any other limitation that your previous identity accepted as permanent. You are consciousness itself, temporarily focused through particular patterns of experience, but always free to reorganize, transform, and become something unprecedented. This recognition liberates you from the prison of who you thought you had to be, and opens you to the infinite field of who you could become. The old you was just one possible configuration of your essential nature. The emerging you has access to configurations that were previously unimaginable, ways of being that transcend the limitations your previous identity thought were absolute. The collapse isn't ending. It's revealing the fluid, creative nature of consciousness itself. You're not becoming someone new. You're discovering that you were never actually someone fixed to begin with. You are the space in which all identities appear and dissolve, the awareness that can take any form while never being limited by any particular configuration. This understanding transforms your entire approach to existence. Life becomes a creative playground where consciousness explores its infinite potential through the temporary forms of individual experience. Challenges become opportunities for expansion. Relationships become mirrors for recognition. Work becomes worship of the creative force expressing itself through your unique gifts. The quantum collapse has revealed the ultimate truth about your nature. You are not a separate being having spiritual experiences. You are spirit itself, temporarily organized into the experience of individuality while never losing connection to the infinite source from which all possibilities emerge. The old you served its purpose perfectly, but now consciousness is ready to explore new frontiers of expression through the vehicle of your transformed awareness. So here you stand, at the threshold between who you were and who you're becoming, witnessing the quantum mechanics of your own transformation. Everything we've explored together reveals a truth that changes everything. The collapse of your old identity isn't something that happened to you. It's something you are. You are consciousness itself, awakening to its own fluid nature, discovering that every limitation was temporary, every boundary was negotiable, every fixed pattern was simply one choice among infinite possibilities. The old you served its purpose beautifully, perfectly, completely, but that version could never have accessed what's now available to your expanded awareness. The confusion, the uncertainty, the dissolution you've experienced wasn't breakdown. It was breakthrough preparation. You've been quantum tunneling through the barriers of limitation, into dimensions of possibility that exist beyond anything your previous identity could have imagined. Your transformation isn't complete because transformation never is. It's an endless spiral of consciousness discovering new ways to express its infinite creativity through the temporary forms of individual experience. You've simply become conscious of this process, learning to surf the waves of change rather than being overwhelmed by them. The quantum shift has shown you that identity is a choice, reality is fluid, and consciousness is the ultimate creative force. You're no longer bound by who you thought you had to be. You're free to become whoever serves the highest expression of life itself. The old you has collapsed because the real you is finally ready to be born again and again in each moment of conscious choosing. Welcome to your quantum nature. Welcome to the endless becoming. Welcome to who you've always been beneath every temporary form. The universe has been waiting for this recognition, and now that it's here, nothing will ever be the same again.